Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. My name is Margaret Owens. I am 72 years old. I am neither famous, nor rich, nor brilliant in the eyes of the world. I am not featured in any article, in any showcase, in any conference room. But I am one of those who go unnoticed and yet build everything in silence. One of those who rise at dawn and fall asleep long after the others, with worn hands and a heart still strong. I was born in the south of Mississippi, in a wooden house that creaked in the storms. My father, Eli Owens, was a man of few words. He worked on the railways, left before dawn and returned covered in dust and drawn. My mother, Darlene, was a seamstress. Gentle, self-effacing, often tired, but her hands had a grace I have never forgotten. She could transform a holy sheet into a Sunday dress. It was her way of making magic in a world without luxury. Life never gave us any gifts. There was no room for whims. We shared everything: bread, simple dreams, heavy silences. I remember the sweltering summers, the winters that filtered through the windows, the clothes mended 100 times, and the songs Mom whispered in the evening to chase away fears. It was in this setting that I learned to grit my teeth. Not to complain. Not to expect anything from anyone, except myself. At 17, I left Mississippi for New York, with a suitcase that was too light and dreams sewn by hand. I took on a series of odd jobs: waitress, housekeeper, receptionist, anything that allowed me to pay for a room and a meal. But despite the fatigue, I felt I was moving forward. I was becoming a woman. A free woman. And then, at 23, my life changed with the arrival of Emily. His father, James Carter, was a charismatic jazz musician. He had that warmth in his voice that made you believe in promises. At first, he seemed to want to build something. Then things changed. He began to shirk his responsibilities, to disappear without explanation. One morning, he went out to get milk, and never came back. Not a word. Not a letter. Just this bitter emptiness he left behind. I found myself alone, with a baby in my arms, a nearly empty fridge, and a fear I didn't dare name. But I didn't have time to cry. I went out, knocked on every door, took on every job I could. I cleaned the luxury apartments of Brooklyn Heights, where the children had bedrooms bigger than my entire studio. I washed floors, dreaming that my daughter would walk on floors that were respected. I baked apple pies in my tiny kitchen and sold them at Saturday markets. I saved every penny to buy Emily textbooks, to pay for her piano lessons, so she could go on school trips like everyone else. I still remember her eyes when she came home with good grades. She would say to me, "See, Mom? We'll get there." I taught him what you don't read in books: dignity, even when people look down on you. Goodness, even when life is tough. The respect, especially towards oneself. Emily was brilliant. Dazzling even. She got a full scholarship for Columbia University. I cried the day she received the letter. Old tears, heavy, but full of pride. Then she became a consultant for a major firm in Manhattan. She wore suits I could never afford, talked about business trips and PowerPoint presentations with a confidence I didn't always recognize. But no matter the distance, the words I no longer understood, I continued to look at her like me. Silent victory. Not against her. Not against James. Against life. Against poverty. Against invisibility. My daughter, she was my sweet revenge. I thought she would never forget me. When Emily introduced me Brandon Fisher, her fiancé, I immediately felt a cold draft passing between us. He was well-mannered, yes, perhaps too well-mannered. Tailored suit, shiny shoes, firm handshake, smile calibrated like a bank advertisement. His gaze, however, remained elsewhere. He looked at me without seeing me. Like one observes a piece of furniture that one won't move, but which has no place in the house. He spoke little, but when he did, his sentences were sharp, precise, as if he were dictating a mental memo. His phone vibrated constantly, and he barely apologized before answering. I observed him, discreetly, with this intuition that only mothers possess, that silent presentiment that whispers, "This man will not take care of your child like you did." But I kept quiet. I fell silent because Emily's eyes were shining as she looked at him. Because she was smiling like a woman who thinks she's finally found refuge. And I knew what it was like, to desperately want refuge. So I smiled too. I shook Brandon's hand warmly, I cooked an entire meal for their arrival, and I prayed, silently, that I'd been wrong. They married the following year, in a chic, minimalist ceremony at a Connecticut vineyard. Everything was white, beige, and gold. No fuss, no running children, no impromptu singing. Just silent waiters, fixed smiles, perfect speeches. Emily was radiant, but not like before. Her glow had changed shades, as if filtering through a curtain of propriety. They bought a beautiful house in Westchester, a residential neighborhood lined with neatly trimmed trees and white picket fences. She emailed me the photos: marble kitchen, light wood stairs, in-ground pool out back. "Come and spend a weekend, Mom. You'll see, it's so peaceful here." I went there, of course. Once. Then another. Then not so often. Emily received me with a mixture of absent-minded affection and well-bred politeness. She was happy for me to come, as long as I left on time. Brandon, he would give me sideways smiles, like a frame that had never been straightened. He would ask me if I was okay without really waiting for an answer. Then they arrived, Chloe and Noah, two beautiful children. Curious, lively, full of that pure energy that only toddlers possess. They threw themselves into my arms when I arrived, calling me Grandma Maggie, with that sing-song in their voices that made me melt. Those moments were worth all the silence. All the effort. But the visits became less frequent. Emily was overwhelmed with work, Brandon was on the go, and the kids had their activities, their parties, their appointments. When I came, it was always, between meetings, always, "Sorry I couldn't stay longer." I was becoming a calendar grandmother. A line on a planner. A voice on a speakerphone. And then, without warning, my body began to betray me. First, osteoarthritis. Pain in my hands, in my knees, as if my bones were reminding me of everything I'd ever carried. Then the dizziness, the loss of balance, the fatigue that clung to my skin like a wet coat. One morning, my doctor, a gentle young man with a calm voice, placed his hand on my arm with a caution that said it all. "Ms. Owens, you should consider living closer to your family. It would be safer. Easier." I didn't answer right away. The word family played in my head like an old record. Family. What I had built. What I had supported with all my might for so many years. What now seemed distant. Formal. I walked home slowly, stepping on each step. I made some tea, then sat for a long time, watching the steam rise like a thought I couldn't put into words. I am a woman proud. I have always refused to be a burden. I learned, at a very young age, not to ask for anything. To walk alone. To rely only on myself. But there, it wasn't not a question of pride, it was a need. An inner calling. I needed to be surrounded. To hear the children's laughter. To feel a presence, even a silent one, in the next room. I needed not to grow old alone in an apartment where no one would knock if I fell. So I called Emily. I still remember the exact moment, like you remember a moment when your heart is beating a little too fast. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sky was a pale gray, taut like a sheet that no one had the strength to iron. The rain fell silently, fine, almost timid, against the windows of my kitchen. The old clock above the microwave read 3:17 p.m., and my kettle whistled softly, filling the room with the scent of cinnamon tea, my little ritual for sad days. I stared at the phone for a long time. I read her name on the screen 3 times, as if the mere act of calling her would disturb her, or worse, disturb her. In his life, the one I helped him build. When I finally pressed the green button, my fingers were trembling a little. Not because of age, but because of the weight I didn't want to put on her. I never liked asking. Even less so of my own daughter. She picked up on the third ring. "Mom? Are you okay?" His voice was soft but distracted. In the background, I could hear the clicking of a keyboard, perhaps a video call on pause, or a child asking for a snack. I closed my eyes for a second before speaking. "Yes, dear. I just wanted to talk to you about something. Nothing urgent." "Well, not exactly." I chose my words carefully, as if handling porcelain. I didn't want to appear dramatic or intrusive. So I spoke softly, almost apologetically, my throat tight with the humility that mothers sometimes wear like a second skin. "I saw the doctor, you know. He thinks it might be better for me if I lived a little closer to you. Nothing complicated, not at your place of course. Just a small studio in the neighborhood. Something simple. So I can see you more often. So I can be there if you need a hand with the kids." I stopped there. No more. I didn't want her to feel a demand. I wanted her to hear a offer of love. There was silence. Just the background noise continuing. Then Emily took a breath. "I understand, Mom. I understand. It's a little sudden." Her tone had hardened, almost imperceptibly. She was already running through all the logistical imperatives, all the what if, all the it's not the right time. Then she added, in a neutral voice, "Let me talk to Brandon about this, okay?" These words froze me. Not because they were hurtful, but because they were full of appolite distance, of a barely disguised refusal behind the marital bureaucracy. Let me talk to Brandon about this. As if my daughter, the one I had rocked, protected, supported through thick and thin, needed someone else's agreement to decide if I could exist a little closer to his life. But I didn't say anything. I smiled through my pain. "Of course, darling. Take your time." We hung up. I stayed there, sitting at my small round table, one hand on my warm cup, the other resting on the still warm phone. The rain had stopped. But inside me, something had begun to fall. The next day Brandon Ho called me. I knew it from the first vibration of the phone. It wasn't Emily. Emily would have written me a sweet note before. She would have told me about her meeting, about Chloe, about the weather in Westchester. No, there wasn't that tiny hint of warmth that penetrates the walls of maternal silence. It was a straight, dry, mechanical ring. A date. A verdict. I picked up. His voice stood out immediately, clear, clean, without thrill or detour, like an executive reading a memo to the Human Resources Department. "Margaret, listen. Emily told me about your call. We've thought it over carefully. Already, these words. We thought about it. As if I were a project. A parameter to be evaluated in an Excel sheet. As if the woman who raised their mother was a sticking point in their domestic organization." He continued, in the same tone, that of people who want to remain polite but not too much, who want to get rid of a subject without taking the blame. "We love you, of course. But, we have our routines. Our balance. The kids have their own rhythms, Emily's on the go a lot. So am I. And it's a house with a lot of comings and goings, a lot of hustle and bustle. We don't really have the structure for that. It's not against you, obviously. It's just." He paused. And then he blurted it out. "We are not a boarding house." And sharp blow to the heart. Clean. Neat. As if it had just double-locked a door. I stood there frozen. My gaze fell into the half-open curtain, where a ray of light touched the kitchen table. I felt that moment in every bone in my body. It wasn't just an answer. It was a denial. An erasure. A boarding house. He could have said many other things. He could have invented an excuse, evoked constraint, feigned regret. But no. He had chosen that word. The one that reduces you to a burden. To an old lady who would try to intrude into a life that no longer wants her. That word was thoughtful. It had the edge of a scalpel. He was still talking, I think. I couldn't hear him anymore. In my head paraded images like burnt photographs, Emily asleep on my chest when she had a fever, me running in the rain to get her medicine, nights spent mending her clothes by hand, breakfasts made with coins found at the bottom of a bag, promises whispered in the dark. I will always be there for you. Always. And there, this man. This polite stranger. Who explained to me that I couldn't approach. Because they had their balance. I swallowed the bitter taste in my throat. I whispered. I understand. Thanks, Brandon. I don't remember saying goodbye. I think I hung up without another word. And then everything became silent, inside and out. Even the clock seemed to have stopped ticking. I stood there for a few moments, my hands on the table, breathless. No tears. Not yet, just this emptiness, this big hole that opens when we understand that we have become superfluous. So I stood up. Slowly. I went to get my old leather notebook, the one that had been sleeping in my bedside drawer for years. I didn't know why I kept it, at the time. Perhaps a remnant of a dream. A space just for me. I opened it. The pages were blank. But not for long. And I started to write. I wrote all. Absolutely everything. My childhood in Mississippi, that stifling South where the air smelled of wet cotton and the summers seemed endless. I recounted the evenings when my mother mended our clothes by the light of an oil lamp, the click of needles mingling with the chirping of crickets. The rainy days when I ran to school without an umbrella, my feet soaked, notebooks clutched to my chest as if they would save me from the world. I wrote my youth in New York, arriving in this city that seemed to be constantly roaring. The odd jobs, the hands burned by cleaning products, the glances that slide over you without seeing you. The winter evenings without heating, where I wrapped myself in an old coat on a too narrow sofa, praying that the pipes wouldn't freeze. I wrote the Christmas mornings, where I couldn't afford to buy a real gift for Emily, so I would find a red ribbon, make heart-shaped pancakes, and tell her that the best things in the world weren't in stores. And she believed me. She looked at me like I was the fairy from the stars, with her big, bright eyes. That's the look I keep, even now, in the deepest recesses of my heart. I wrote the silent pains off a single mother. The nights when I had to pretend everything was okay, even though I had nothing left to eat. The nights crying in my bathroom so Emily wouldn't hear me. The humiliations at work, the clients who talk to you like you're something, the employers who treat you like you have no history or dignity. But I also wrote the hopes the first time Emily learned to read on her own. The day she received her scholarship to Columbia. The applause in the room when she gave her valedictorian speech. Those moments that made my heart beat faster, like silent rewards for all the invisible sacrifices. And then I wrote Oblivion. The one that slowly takes over you when your children grow up and you cease to be essential. The one that settles in when your phone stops ringing, when your first name only appears as a formality. I wrote about this invisibility that envelopes you like a light shroud, when people look at you without seeing you. When your voice becomes background noise, a habit, a warm memory. But this notebook, he looked at me in the face. He listened to me. He welcomed my words without judging. He became my mirror, my confidant, my pillar. He stood up, page after page, as if each line warmed a part of my frozen soul. One day, while I was drinking my tea in the small park near the municipal library, my friend Carolyn sat down next to me. A lively, curious woman, always with a book in her bag. She was part of a local reading circle, a group of women of all ages who shared stories about forgotten stories and marginalized voices. She said to me, her eyes sparkling, "Maggie, you should show your notebook to my niece. She's an editor. Independent, but brilliant. She likes what's real, raw, and alive." I laughed. A dry, almost incredulous laugh. Who would want to read about the life of an old lady? But deep inside me, a small voice, timid, damaged, but tenacious, whispered, Maybe now is the time. Maybe your life deserves to be heard. So I said yes. A hesitant, awkward, but real yes. This simple word changed the rest of my life. A month later, while folding laundry and listening to an old Etta James song on the radio, the phone rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart beat faster, for no apparent reason, as if something important was hanging in the air. I dried my hands on a towel, took a breath, and answered the phone. On the other side, a female voice, young, but fragile. Moved. Mrs. Owens? That's Grace Hamilton. Carolyn's niece. I read your manuscript. A short silence. Then she continued, her voice trembling, panting, as if the words were escaping her. Your story moved me. I cried, I laughed, I saw my own grandmother in your pages. I want to publish it. I really want to. What you wrote is necessary. I remained silent. Me, published? I sat on the edge of my bed, unable to utter a word. My heart pounded in my chest like an impatient fist. I remembered every line written in that notebook, every memory poured out with pain, every night trembling before the silences of the past. And there, a stranger said to me, the world needs to hear from you. She explained the process to me. An independent publisher, certainly, but a passionate one. A local printer. A small team that believed in truth more than numbers. The project was modest, but sincere. And above all, respectful. She didn't want to change anything. To soften anything. She wanted my words to remain intact, raw, powerful. A few months later, my book came out. His name was The Silent Mother. The cover was simple, elegant. A cream background, an empty armchair under a lit lamp. Nothing spectacular, but a presence, a promise. I thought it might be read by a few curious people. Older women. Nostalgic retirees. But I was wrong. Against all odds, the book touched me. Deeply. Letters began to arrive. Dozens. Then hundreds. Mothers, of the girls, women of all generations. Men, also, some in tears, others confused, shaken. They told me. You put into words what I never knew how to say. I thought I was the only one who felt this way. You gave me strength again. I have been invited to speak at libraries, of the community centers, of the literary cafes, of the girls' high schools, of the universities. Same. My voice, which had never crossed more than 3 walls, suddenly became public, listened to, repeated. Once, a local radio show welcomed me. Then another. Then an evening television channel. They did my hair, my makeup, and told me, look closely at the camera, Margaret. I smiled, a little lost, but with dignity. I told my story without anger. Just with the truth. Emily? She didn't call me. Not a word. Not a message. But I knew she heard. I felt it. Because a silence that's too perfect is always a confession. And then one evening, late, as I was sorting through my emails and getting ready to turn off my computer, a notification Instagram appeared. A private message. It was signed, Chloe Fisher. My heart leaped. I clicked. The message simply read. Grandma, I read your book in secret. Mom cried silently in the kitchen. She thought I couldn't see her. I love you. I stood there with tears in my eyes. No sadness. No regrets. More than candy. Because even though my daughter didn't yet know how to come back to me, my granddaughter, she had reached out her hand. Today I live in Providence, in a peaceful residence for retired artists and authors. My apartment is small, but bathed in light. A large window overlooks an old magnolia tree. Every morning, its leaves whisper something, as if saying to me, you survived. You spoke. You are here. I give writing workshops to women like me. Women who have been silenced for too long. Women whom life has not spared, but who still have so much to say. We write together, in a room with light walls, our hands stained with ink and our hearts awakening. Non. I may not be a boarding house, but I became a refuge home for those who have loved in silence, who have been forgotten, rejected, erased. Here, their voices exist. Like mine. And every morning, I get up, I make my cinnamon tea, I open my new notebook. And I'm still writing.